lectures and interviews with distinguished speakers from various domains, including media, sports, administration, literature, and politics, among others. In the past, we have proudly hosted the likes of Kailash Satyarthi, His Holiness Dalai Lama, and Venkaiah Naidu, Indra Nooyi, and A.R. Rahman, to name a few. To continue this grand legacy, I wish to introduce our speaker for this lecture, Mr. Sridhar Ramaswamy, who is the founder and CEO of startup, which is an ad-free, privacy-focused search engine called Neva. He is an alumnus of IIT Madras and has graduated with bachelor's degree in computer science in 1889. Oh, sorry.
1989.
1989.
I'm old, not that old.
Yes, 1989. Sir, we are honored to have you here with us today. Our first question to you, yes, is why the name Neva? Is there a story behind it?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. Especially to be mentioned in the same sentence as the other immensely great people that you have had as guests before. And I have very fond memories and some tough memories. I struggled at IIT Madras. My first 2 years were just really hard, getting used to being away from home and the incredibly difficult curriculum and so on. But nevertheless, it was a transformational and formative experience, and I got used to it as things went along. To jump to your question, I wish there were a clever story behind Neva. The reality is that it's actually really hard to get a domain and get trademarks on anything that you want to do today. In fact, there is a company, I know of a company that's trying to make this process easier, how to get your trademark. And so we basically made a list of sounds that we liked, like me and va and ya and sa and so on. And I looked at every 2-syllable combination, and Neva was the only one that I could get a domain. We started with neva.co, not neva.com, and also more importantly, get a trademark. And promptly, one other company with a similar sounding name, Viva, was very unhappy that we were starting Neva. And so we kind of had to negotiate with them for a bit. It came to a happy ending. And then it took another year and a half to get Neva.com. As I said, that's the story of Neva. We were thinking about names like, Panoptic, something with a pan to mean everything. I'm much happier with Neva as a name.
Okay. Yes, sir, that's interesting. You and Vivek were in such stable positions career-wise. How did you convince yourself to leave that and take a risk of not knowing how exactly it will pay off?
Yeah, one of the most important things that, we in computer science have to realize is that we have enormous opportunity. And my parents, for example, came of age just after independence in a very, very different kind of situation. Like a middle-class life was simply not guaranteed at all for them. In fact, kind of most of their lives, literally, they struggled to buy a house because it was just really hard. The fortunate thing now is that some of the, what you can call necessities or comforts, clearly that depends on the region and country that you are in, like being able to support your family or buying a house, are easier for people in computer science, especially in Silicon Valley. And that makes opportunity possible. We were lucky to be a part of Google, yes, but both of us worked very hard. We worked together for at least 10 years at Google. We worked hard, created a lot of value for Google, but we were also well rewarded for it. And so we felt like this was a risk that was worth taking because we knew that this was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime chance to rethink something as basic and fundamental as search, which is like almost literally kind of our gateway to all the information that is around us. We'll talk a little bit more about the product, but we were basically lucky to be in a situation where we were well off enough that we could say, hey, it is worth it to take a bigger risk.
Yes, sir. And documentaries like The Social Dilemma have tried to shine a light on how tech companies operate and how they use our data to customize advertisements and keeping us hooked on their application. Is it really as bad as they portray it?
This is a good question, and this is an especially interesting week for tech with the revelations in 60 Minutes around Facebook and so on.
Yeah.
I would say one fundamental fact to keep in mind, that is that companies are established, the concept of a company is about maximizing value for shareholders, and in tech, and this is recent, for employees. Because for companies like Google and Facebook, they're nothing without their employees, without the software engineers. We live in a situation where software engineers are not really easily expendable. So unlike an Amazon, let's say, which clearly is not as nice to, let's say, their warehouse workers. So companies essentially become entities that optimize around only two sets of people, their investors and their employees. And in this kind of a situation, everything is driven by what is right for the top line and the bottom line. So we often hear phrases like companies are people too. No, they're not. They don't feel empathy. They don't feel pain. They are opaque structures. They're profit maximization structures. And people in India especially know this because of our history with the East India Company and things of that sort of nature. The details vary, but as companies get larger and have more and more authority, let's face it, both Google, for example, and Amazon make more money than most countries have as their GDP. Okay, just like absorb that for a second. And so it gives them enormous power, and they are essentially like autocratic entities, meaning there's nothing wrong with it. They report to one CEO. And so, the kind of things that happen in these companies become entirely about self-preservation, become entirely about what is right for the company. And part of the reason I got out of search ads was because I realized there was no end to this. It was always going to be about optimizing more and more. And I tell people, there are bad search experiences. If you want to see what Google is going to be like 5 years from now, that's fine. Go to yahoo.com today and search. You will see what the search of your future is going to be. And so I'm not, and this, by the way, happens even in a situation where individual people are generally well-meaning. But like a mob, a bunch of supposedly well-meaning people can create situations that are entirely unacceptable for society. And the other stark thing that you need to pay attention to is the massive gulf between, say, how much these companies are willing to spend to keep people in the United States safe versus any other country. Those numbers are wild. They're not based on population. They're based on things like how much money do we make in what country. So as multinationals, especially, it is completely unrealistic for anyone to think that very large multinationals are going to be responsible stewards in each of the countries that they operate in. So this is the reality of the situation. Plus, they have such a footprint and are very monopolistic, and they're actual monopolies, for example, in the case of search or in the case of online shopping, that there is no there's no questioning their behavior. This is part of the reason why we were excited to create Neva, because it is an alternate way to do things. It is competition. I joke to people, Neva is actually good for Google. It forces them to confront what is possible, to confront what a great product could be, and perhaps spend more energy on that. I know that was a long answer, but my short answer is, without any explicit evil intent on any part, the situation is just as worse as it appears to be, actually likely even more worse.
Sure. And you've stated that 5 years from now, Google, to know how Google looks, you need to go to yahoo.com. Is that because of the enormous number of ads that Yahoo runs, or what exactly did you mean?
Yeah. 100%. It's the markings, it's the number of ads, it's the focus on quality. Ad models sort of, keep expanding.
Okay. Yes, sir. In continuation with that, I'm sure most of us use search engines for harmless purposes. For example, gaming, online shopping, or watching a movie. Why should we be scared of losing our data, given that the potential leak of data doesn't harm us adversely?
Just one sec. I seem to have lost my video. Just one sec.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. You're asking about data and why does it matter?
Yes.
The reality of today's situation, for example, is that everything that you do on search, everything that you do beyond search, is monetized, and ads are shown. And what happens is that they take up your time, they take up your attention. Rational people, especially, are quite remarkable for thinking that they have full agency over everything that they do. In other words, that no one will be able to influence what it is that they do, what it is that they buy. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Your attention, your time, your dollars can be hijacked, and people can make you do things that you want in a very, very subtle kind of way. So this is the primary issue with the ad-driven model, where all of our information is used at first to provide a so-called free service, but over time is just more and more exploitative. And the other thing that is going to happen also is that because markings keep getting slimmer and slimmer, our ability to tell apart what is real versus what is a promotional message also continuously diminishes. So, for example, part of the reason why there is so much distrust about vaccines in the US is because of a whole amount of misinformation. Why does misinformation thrive? It's because of the ads model that is all about attention. If, for example, you set up a new search engine and you basically say, if you set up like a new social network and you basically say your goal is to maximize the amount of time that people spend, you are going to put sort of more and more racy content. You're going to put more and more crazy content that makes people angry, that people get attracted by, and so on. That's the reality of the internet, where at one level, things are free, but at another level, a lot of people don't have much agency, don't have much control over where they're spending their time, over where they are, spending their dollars. I'm not at all suggesting that there needs to be like a top-down central answer to this one, but part of the value of creating products like Neva is that our focus becomes much more about what is good for you. What do you actually want, as opposed to what do advertisers want to tell you. One of the top benefits that people tell us they get when they use Neva is that they feel a lot calmer because ads are not chasing them all around the internet. That was a byproduct. That was not the design of why we created Neva, but that was a happy byproduct because we do things like make extensions on browsers that kill tracking, that kill this flow of information across sites. And so your attention, your focus, where you spend your time is easily the biggest resource that you have. And tech has managed to hijack that for most of us in a pretty fundamental way.
Yes, sir. So these free things come at a cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At a tremendous cost to all of us, because we do things that drive more engagement and more attention for technologies that we use rather than what's really good for us.
Yes, sir. So what do you think are the steps that we can take to protect our data and sensitive information on the internet?
That's a very hard question. But fortunately, all of you know tech really well. So all of the basic things around protecting your most important of accounts. I tell people your main email account that you put as the contact email for all your other accounts, as well as things like your banking account. The most critical accounts that you cannot live without, you definitely should have things like two-factor authentication. I try and use like a hardware authenticator as much as possible for my for my important accounts. I would say like using a password manager has also become kind of has become required. I pay for a lot of online publications. I was recently, I subscribed to the Hindu, which is the paper that I read growing up. And I was very happy that, that I did that. But, on my personal profile, I also have an ad blocker because I want to protect my data, my time. And I would say those are like some of the basic things, but simply being conscious of like how we use our time, where it goes, I think is very important. And taking simple steps to protect data around just things like what devices you use, what sites do you go to, how do you protect your most important accounts, how do you not do things like this is a strong password for all of your sites, things. Those are the very basics that honestly all of us should be doing. Because increasingly, especially in the US, like digital identity theft is a bigger and bigger issue.
Yes, sir. Talking about password managers, do you think the open software password managers like, let's say, Bitware, do you think are these safe? Because we store all our passwords like on them and they don't come at a subscription. So
yeah, I actually don't know. Okay. I know some of the US companies like 1Password, and then and LastPass and Dashlane. That is definitely a big worry, because them getting hacked now is like such a major vector for everything else getting getting hacked. This is why I say that for the most critical accounts, the things like hardware two-factor authentication are important, because in modern browsers, those are impossible to spoof, at least right now. So that even if your password is lost, it's going to be pretty hard for someone to break into your accounts.
Yes, sir. Moving on to the next question. Several governments are using internet censorship as a tool of restraining public opinion in certain controversial domains. What is your take on censorship of search results?
Yeah, this is a tricky question because it gets into, and it's an especially tricky question for multinational companies. At one level, I feel that every country has a sovereign right to figure out what is okay in their country versus not. There is no global standard. That is just imperialism in a very different fashion. On the other hand, I think there is a duty that tech players have to provide transparency around what is, around what is done. And so, I would say that tech companies should take positions, and they should reveal data about when results have been, have been censored, or when people's information is requested. As you know, law enforcement can make requests for people's personal information, and by law, most companies have to turn that data over. I think there should be an amount of transparency around it, but I also feel that tech companies, US tech companies, deciding what free speech in India should be is very arrogant in its own way. And I have a hard time saying like that should be the norm.
Yes, sir. And we have a question from the audience. N. Hari Shankar from Metallurgy Department has a question for you. The growing issue with search engines is data collection. But on the other hand, A lack of context in results is pointed out as DuckDuckGo's major drawback. How does Neva plan on reading this fine line?
Yeah, things like lack of context is shorthand for bad search quality. Here is the important thing to understand. Data collection itself, especially personal data collection, meaning associating everything that you do against your, say, your Google account, is not the thing that drives search quality. It's the amount of data that like is queries and clicks on results that influences search quality. But you can collect a lot of that information in a perfectly anonymous fashion. There is no reason to conflate that with personal data collection. But the point is well taken that search quality needs to be better. And one of the major efforts that a significant part of Neva is working on is that core web search quality, which really needs to be better. But that can be done without kind of massive data collection. The irony of the modern internet is that personalization generally means targeted ads. It does not mean more personalized products for you. Search doesn't really change a whole lot from person to person. Okay, but what you search for, they're used to show you different ads, both like on Google and off Google. Personalization has been hijacked by the ads industry as providing you with more relevant, more targeted ads. People don't actually, want that or care much, for that. But I think search quality is important. And this is one of the reasons why, from day one, we invested heavily into the infrastructure and problems behind solving core web search. And that's been quite a journey. We'll write about it soon, of dealing with like petabyte scale systems that most companies outside of the big 3 or 4 haven't really dealt with. But that we think is going to be one of the major differentiators of Neva, because we are running our own web search stack for significant fractions of queries.
Okay. Sir, so does this mean that companies should use data to personalize search results more over targeted ads? Is that what you wanted to conclude?
Great question. So for example, about Neva, by default, so we give you 2 options. One, by default, we retain 90 days of search history. This is not for our benefit. This is more for things like, can we make recommendations for you? Can we create a better news feed for you? Can we suggest better things for you? And also when you start typing in queries, we are able to do query completions based on your search history. People often run queries that they have run before. So those are pretty much the only uses for Neva and search data. For example, if we know, we haven't done this, but it's one of the things that we will do relatively soon. If you've done a lot of programming queries, for example, and then you type in find Swift, what are you looking for? Likely, you're looking for the function find in the latest version of the programming language Swift. But Swift is also a banking code. And so on many search engines today, for example, if you put in find Swift, you'll get this like weird combination of banking results and programming results. And so this can be done both with explicit personalization, where we ask, hey, Sridhar, are you a tech-heavy programming user? Then we will slant your search more towards that. Or it can be done implicitly with the queries and clicks that you run. Those are the kinds of things that we are thinking of. We also offer essentially an incognito mode where you can turn off, Neva memory, and no queries that you do will be associated against your account. We offer an incognito mode explicitly also, but our point is like you need to be in charge of how the product works, because we want, because of the business model is like the product should do what you want. Otherwise, like you basically won't come to us.
Yeah. Okay, we have one more question from the audience. Mahadevan Ravichandran, an IITM alumnus, has a question for you. What advancements can we expect in technology behind search engines in the future? For instance, now we have voice and image search. What can we expect next?
Yeah, I think voice search is clearly a big deal. We haven't invested in it because we feel like getting core web search right is more important for Neva at this early stage. People forget that Google literally has been around for 25 years, was started by Larry and Sergey in like 96, 97, then became a company in 98, if I remember correctly. But definitely things like more visual search, where we understand the content of visual media, both pictures and video, I think are interesting places. The incremental value of a lot of these things, by the way, are not that clear, meaning how much more value do they add over a regular search engine. People often talk about helping with more complex tasks. I think that is a fiendishly difficult problem. People have tried this for a decade plus. I think those are harder to crack simply because there is so much diversity and variance in how we do things. Something as simple as ordering a pizza turned out to be a remarkably difficult problem for like the voice assistants, because there's just so much choice that you have in how you go about doing it. But those are some of the examples of places where I think the tech will keep pushing forward.
Okay, so even before venturing out into some new field, you think the tech will first optimize the existing things like image and voice, and then move on to them?
Potentially. I mean, the thing that can also happen is that circa 2000, 2001, Word, for example, in my personal opinion, had reached feature perfection, meaning Word just worked. And every feature that they added on top of it made the product worse, not better. And so the next major advance in things like word processing and spreadsheets came not because of any fundamental new product insight or even business model to a certain extent, but it came because we see, the people at Google said, oh, we will use the web as a delivery mechanism. That's the reason why, Sheets and Docs and Gmail became so popular, because they became applications that delivered the same thing that other things like Outlook and Word and Excel did, but now over a web browser. So distribution and access became the innovation angles rather than anything fundamentally profound about the core word processor. So innovation can happen in different ways because of things like platform shifts as well. Obviously, all of the tech companies are trying to figure out what the big platform after the mobile phones are going to be. So far, smart speakers have been a bit of a dud, but hope springs eternal. And that might be the axis by which innovation happens. What we're trying with Neva is more of a business model innovation, where we think we can create a different product by reorienting the basic nature of the product.
That was really insightful. While talking about the internet, we need to talk about accessibility. There is a digital divide between rural and urban areas, rich and poor, male and female, and so on. How do you intend to make sure that the benefits of technology reach all sections of population, considering Neva is a paid platform?
Honestly, for a small startup, us just getting success with some segment of people is really important. I do think about things like access. We have not spent a lot of time on it. The answers that I can give you are, we want to make sure, for example, that Neva is available for free for people that can't afford to pay. It's also a smart business move. The students, for example, we want them to get used to the idea of a search engine that just works for them. Those are under kind of active consideration. Those are things that we want to do. But a more fundamental point that I want to make is that tech companies offering so-called free products is not actually societal innovation, because it always comes with strings attached. It always comes with ulterior motives. People in India, for example, didn't get cell phones for free. Nobody said, oh, we should make like cell phones not cost anything. That is fair. We have this silly belief that useful software services should be free in the name of equity. But in situations where free products are run by multinational companies that are all about their bottom line, you're not actually doing your people a favor by hooking them onto free products. I'm not claiming I have an answer, but I have a much more humble and limited view of what companies should aspire to. I want to create low-cost products that are accessible to everybody. But to a certain extent, I also don't pretend that Neva or Google is going to solve broadband access in the US, let alone India. And when big tech companies offer things that sound too good to be true, like free internet access, you can safely assume that there are strings attached, and they will figure out how to get that money back. And so I'm actually ducking your question and saying, I just want to make good low-cost products. And I don't pretend somehow that I'm going to solve access for the world's population. It's like, you're just a small company. And even when large companies claim they want to do this, they usually have ulterior motives. You should not really trust them when they say that. It's an unsatisfactory answer. But my point more is that the government, the democracies, your elected government, my elected government, these are the ones that actually care about everybody that lives in the country. Don't think that rich billionaires are going to care about providing equitable access to all of India's people or all of USA's people. They don't.
Yes, sir. And talking about building products, could you shed some light on your experience as an Indian entrepreneur in the US? What hardships have you encountered in this journey? And do you have any advice for the budding entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I would say, clearly I'm very lucky, first of all, in that, I came at a time where there was a lot of opportunities available, where the rampant discrimination that a lot of people faced, even in tech, in the US, a lot of Indian people did not really face. We were given opportunities. We were accepted as equals. And to me, that's actually a pretty precious gift. And I, for example, care deeply about providing equal access to things like education from that perspective, because I just feel like I got amazing education from IIT Madras. I got an amazing education at Brown University. I honestly did not really have to pay for either of them, and then I got these amazing opportunities. So I feel very fortunate in that respect. I think the kind of things that I'd have told you maybe some number of years ago would be to not get buttonholed, for example, into being an engineer. I used to get slightly offended when people would call me like a really great engineering leader. I'd go like, what do you mean? I can do more. But I think more and more, there are a ton of opportunities that are being afforded people. For example, for people that are studying at IIT Madras, I would say, think of technology as an enabler. Think of technology as one of the tools that you have to create useful products for people. Learn empathy. Learn to look at your product from the viewpoint of your customer. Talk to a lot of potential customers. Get that feedback. I still do a lot of customer conversation, and the feedback like makes me cringe because I'm like, oh, our product needs to be so much better. So I would say that focus on what do your users, what do your customers want, what do they see that we as developers of products don't. That is the most significant piece of advice that I can give you. It is easily given, but it is hard to internalize in practice. And by 2021, all of you should feel confident that honestly, that there is no job on the planet that you cannot do. All of you are incredibly talented and incredibly driven. So the opportunity is there. It's a matter of bringing on that right perspective and then taking risks. There's always a risk with joining a startup or creating a startup. I remember what my parents were like. And I suspect for some folks in India, at least, people will discourage risk. It is partly your job to explain that the world that we live in is very, very different. But that comes later. The best piece of advice, as I said earlier, is you should focus relentlessly on who your users are, who your customers are, and you should see the world through their eyes, and that will transform how you think, how you see your world.
Yes. Adding to that, this thing that if we are deep into something, we usually forget the beginner's perspective. So is that exactly what you meant by talking to more customers and getting to know about the product?
Could you repeat your question, please?
When we are deep into something, we usually forget how it is to be a beginner or how the problem
100%.
exactly is. Yeah.
100%.
So, yes, sir. So this is the same thing to consider customer feedback and look from their perspective.
That's right. That's right. Being able to see things from different people's perspectives. It's even important for the paper that you write. If you write a paper for a particular course or an essay or a long answer, what I try to do, for example, for each of the blogs that we write, is I go through a process where I literally clear my head, close my eyes for 15 seconds, put myself in the shoes of the person that I think will be reading this blog, and then I try to read it with a cleared brain and a fresh pair of eyes. And that is when I'll often be surprised by how the thing makes no sense whatsoever, because you're looking at it from that perspective of a different person. Products work the same way. Once you go through a startup flow 10 times, you have memorized everything. You can't see it at all. And so it takes a special effort either to talk to people and watch what they do, or just clear your head, put yourself in the shoes of a potential user and go through your software again. Obviously, you need to do both.
Yes, sir. Sir, we have conducted a guest speaker contest on our social media handles. And we have the winner, Rishikesh Saban from the Metallurgy department, who would like to ask you a question now. Saban, sure. You can ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, sir. Honor. So my question is actually, what was vision that Google had to dominate the search engine market? And the subsequent question is what was your vision before leaving Google and starting Neva? What was the user centric, or how the economical model will work?
Yeah. At a core level, Google got to a dominant position because it had a really good product, and it made so much money early on that they could plan for the long term, years out. And they were also incredibly smart business people. People think that Google became a great product by word of mouth. That's not really the case. And so the distribution deals, for example, that Google cut with AOL, that Google cut with Yahoo, and then with a lot of the device makers, is one of the main reasons why Google succeeded. They were smarter about how they managed all these complex relationships than anyone else. And obviously, when the mobile transition came along, Android, which in some way it's like Google Search 2.0, because it was a free product for carriers, cemented their dominance in search. I left for a few reasons. One, I had been at Google for 15 years, and I wanted to do something myself. And I knew that the more time I spent at Google, the less likely that it was going to be that I would create a startup. So at some level, I just wanted out. I was also deeply disillusioned by working on ads, and I felt that an ads-based company simply could not be user-focused in the long term, and I just didn't want to work on ads. We also had a lot of very difficult policy issues confronting ads on YouTube. Vivek also worked on YouTube ads. I joke to people that we are both refugees from YouTube ads. So I was deeply disillusioned working on ads. I just wanted a clean, fresh start. And there were a few problems that interested us, but we picked search because we passionately loved the problem of helping people find what they want. And we genuinely think and thought that we could create a superior product by starting with a different business model and different product principles. That's how Neva was born. It's a long set of just walks, in this area, and Neva is the conceptualization of kind of a lot of our thinking.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadil. Now moving on to the last question. Has IIT shaped your journey in any way? What is the one best thing you got out of IIT Madras?
It shaped my life in so many different ways. I can't even begin to get started. We had world-class, professors. My advisor, Kalyani Krishnan, for example, could have been anywhere in the world teaching. He chose to teach at IIT Madras. If I look back, I'm just incredibly touched with what those folks did, because these are all world-class professors that can be anywhere, that still chose to teach students. And then the class itself was incredibly talented. And just as a matter of survival, you had to be much better. You know the story. All of us have been in high schools where we were like really good in the high school, and then you show up at IIT, and then you realize everybody's just as smart as you are, probably smarter. And so the intense competition and the drive for excellence also shaped me. There was also, we are talking about 88, 89, but there was budding entrepreneurship there. Professor Mahabala actually funded a small project that I did for LED signs. He also funded a project for the first Indian language spreadsheet that some other folks, I wasn't a part of it, created as part of my batch. And so people like that encouraged innovation, even back then. 1988 was the first year in which Microsoft hired directly from IIT Madras. They hired 4 engineers, and that was quite the controversy. And so, similarly, even doing things like taking the GRE comes very easily and naturally when you are part of IIT Madras, because the people around you know. There is the tribal knowledge that is passed on from batch to batch. I think so in many, many, many ways, my life has been profoundly influenced by the quality of the education, by the quality of my fellow students and their excellence, and by the pathway that was laid down for all the things that were possible after we were there. I'm not kidding. I 100% would not have done any of the things that I've done in my life if not for my IIT Madras education.
Yes. And talking about that project you had, you got funded. So were you into entrepreneurship right from your college days? Are you interested in it?
Clearly, I went to, I did research and worked for, research labs in Jersey before I decided to come to the West Coast. As I said, I grew up in a different environment where there was an emphasis on having a stable job, especially early on. Pretty much all of the money that I saved in my first year of working, this was at a place called Belco, I gave to my dad to build a house. He was desperate to build a house. And so, yeah, I would not describe myself as entrepreneurial back then. Ambitious, yes. Wanting to get things done, yes. But you're also talking 30 years ago. And realistically, I don't think I was ready then to start a company. I don't think I'd have been very good at it. I'm a slow learner, and so I'm a relatively old startup founder, but I'm passionate about learning, and I am relentless about learning. Hence Neva, and fingers crossed.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. With that, we come to the end of the lecture. I would like to thank Mr. Sridhar Ramaswamy for spending his valuable time with us, giving us insights and answering our questions. Oh, sorry, sir, I have spelled your spelling wrong.
That's okay. It's Ramaswamy.
Excuse me, sir. Yes,
That's
sir.
okay.
I would like to thank all the viewers who submitted the questions for the lecture. Stay tuned to the EML channel because we have an exciting lineup of speakers